So let's welcome everyone. Terry Boardman. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh, good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see you. Thanks very much for coming out. Last time I was here, I think you were up the road, wasn't it? Was that way or was this way?
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah, that way. Right. Right, yeah. Yeah, so what I'm going to talk about tonight is, in one sense, can you all hear me all right? Yeah?
Yes.
In one sense, is very, very simple. It basically comes down to 1, 2, 3, and that will be clearer as we go on. We'll start with 1. Start here. Just have a look at these pictures I'm going to show you. And just see what they have in common. I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to quickly go through them, and you get the point pretty quickly, I think. That was never built, that was a design for Berlin that Hitler made. And this, alas, was built and still exists. Anybody recognise the guy at top left?
Is that not the Tower of Babel?
Yes, it is. Look, sharp eyes there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's some people think it was deliberately designed to be like the Tower of Babel. It is, of course, the EU in Strasbourg. But the guy at top left, nobody recognises him. That is so interesting, folks. Because this is the man. This is the man against. I voted for Brexit last June. Any other Brexit voters here? This is the man we voted against. This is the man who is recognised by the entire Eurocrat elite as the creator of the EU. This is Jean Monnet, who founded the European Coal and Steel Community in 1950, which is the first step in the European project. Right? And he was a French cognac salesman originally. And then in the First World War he came over to England and made many contacts. And then gradually they went on throughout his life, and in America as well. And he made many contacts with the British and American elite. And to cut a long story short, it was his goal to unite Europe and to create a United States of Europe through economic means, not political. But his goal was to create a political state. One United States of Europe, just like the United States of America, only Europe. Yeah? And for him, because of his close connections with the Brits and the Americans, and because of his own particular philosophy of life, in many respects he wasn't a true Frenchman, he felt that this United States of Europe should be, as it were, a little sister to the American Big Brother. But this is the man, this is the architect, Jean Monnet. Without him, it wouldn't have happened. Widely recognised by the bureaucracy and by the State Department. Worked very closely with Dean Acheson. Some of the older members here might recognise that name. American Secretary of State in the late 40s, early 50s. Anyway, you probably notice what these buildings all have in common, yeah? Domes, right. The dome. All is brought together under the dome. And these domes were created by these grand monarchs and rulers, emperors if you will, who wished to impose a certain kind of uniformity on that which they ruled. So this is Emperor Hadrian. He wasn't a particularly bad guy as far as the Roman emperors go. But that's the Pantheon in Rome. And then we get to Emperor Justinian, and that is the Church of Hagia Sophia. I've deliberately taken this picture because that's how it would have looked when it was in Constantinople. That's how it would have looked when it was built. Today, of course, it's got 4 minarets around it. Yeah, because it's it was taken over, of course, by the Muslims in 1453. But that was a great Christian church when he built that in the 6th century. Now, Justinian was very much one emperor, one religion, one empire person. He wanted to impose uniformity in his empire, and particularly in the area of religion, and particularly in the area of law. So I'm sure you're aware that our legal system in Britain is very different from the legal system they have on the continent. And the basis of that Roman law is rooted in the Codex Justinianus, which goes back to this emperor here. The basis of Roman law goes back to Justinian. And then this, of course, sorry?
Is that where the word justice comes from?
No, it's, well, they're related. The two words are related, but it doesn't come from his name, no. This is, of course, St. Peter's in Rome. And this, of course, you know, Charles II designed that. Interesting there, just a little aside. Anybody hear on the news yesterday that a property developer called Irving Seller died? 82. Did you hear about that? It was reported on the BBC. Irving Seller died yesterday, 82. He was one of 5 very, very successful Jewish property developers who are changing the face of London. So this is the guy who actually is responsible for the Shard, which I'm sure you have heard of. This massive, great big needle, which has gone up in the east end of London, yeah? And has now become the prime landmark. And Irving Seller actually said, it was mentioned on the BBC yesterday, he actually said that it's the Shard today that is the landmark, the symbol of London. It's not St. Paul's. But the Shard was not only built by him. In fact, his business went into crisis in the process around the time of the Great Crash. And so he was helped out in the building of the Shard. Anybody know by whom? Anybody know who opened the Shard back in 2012, I think it was? Huh? Prince Charles. Yeah, well, you see, in those days, in the 17th century, it would have been Prince Charles. But no, it was opened by representative of the government of Qatar. Because it was the Qataris who helped out Irving Seller to build the Shard. Yeah? Now think about that, it's very interesting. So the Shard, in other words, was built by Jews and Arabs. And Centre Point, who built that? I'm sure you all know what Centre Point is. Yeah, one of the original really ugly buildings there in the middle of London. Tottenham Court Road. Yeah?
Was the architect Foster?
Well, I'm not talking about the architect. The architect might have been Foster. But again, it was built by one of these 5 I mentioned earlier, these 5 property developers. His name was Hyams. And the interesting thing, as I said, is that you have 2 Semites, because I always feel this word anti-Semitic is a misnomer. We shouldn't really say anti-Semitic because Arabs are also Semites. You know, we should really properly use the word anti-Jewish, not anti-Semitic. But it's become fixed, unfortunately. It's just interesting to see that you have the Semites, the Jews and the Arabs, are now changing the face of London. And we know that lots of rich Arabs in particular have been moving into London in recent years. But again, just think, at the time this was built, Jewish people had started to come over from Amsterdam, from Holland, with William III, so-called Glorious Revolution, 1688. And they were starting to establish themselves, and they were bringing over, not only them, but also the Dutch, financial skills to the city of London. And it was these financial skills brought by the Dutch and the Jews, the Dutch Jews, which really enabled the British Empire, the city of London, to take off in the 18th century. Because in the 17th century, Britain had the ships, Britain had the will, Britain had the men, but Britain did not have the money. England, I should say, really. We did not have the money. And it was only after the Bank of England was founded, and then with the financial acumen, with the financial skills of these Dutch people and Dutch Jews, that this country really took off in the 18th century and was able to finance its expansion. So that's an interesting thing, you see, that they were arriving, these Jewish people, these Semitic people were arriving at the time St. Paul's was going up as this great Christian cathedral, the cathedral of the British Empire, some people call it. And now, 300 years later, we have this situation where all these remarkable buildings are going up in London, but some of the most significant of them are not in fact developed, paid for, organised by Brits, but they're actually paid for by people with a different background. It's interesting, just as a phenomenon, yeah? We also see the phenomenon of many churches, as you know, are now being deconsecrated and are becoming nightclubs, discos, mosques. I don't know about synagogues, but certainly mosques. That, of course, Thomas Jefferson, Adolf Hitler, and Jean Monnet, who I mentioned. So, this principle of the dome, which takes in everybody, one empire, one world, one pattern, this is what we rejected in the Brexit last summer. And thank goodness we did. Because not only is Britain not supposed to be part of that uniformity, as far as I'm concerned, but also Europe is not supposed to be part of that uniformity. For those of you, and I'm sure many of you have, been on the continent, one of the beauties of Europe, the whole continent, is that its diversity, is that these cultures are also different. That is how Europe develops over the centuries. All the different languages, all the different cultures, all the different religions. And now, what's been coming from Brussels since the 50s is this increasing dead hand of uniformity. Oneness. What the Nazis used to call ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one emperor, one leader, one state, one kingdom, one realm. This principle of oneness is not appropriate for our time. This principle of oneness might have been appropriate in the time of Hadrian. And Hadrian lived about 100 years after Christ. It might have been appropriate then. It might have been appropriate in the times of the Egyptian pharaohs, but it's certainly not appropriate for us. But there are still people, and there have been people all the way through European history, since the Roman Empire, who've always looked back to the Roman Empire and have tried to reimpose this Roman Empire on the peoples of Europe. Because, for example, they believed that when we have one empire and one army and one system, then we have peace, Pax Romanum. And then later on, that became Pax Hispaniae. Then it became Pax Francorum, Pax Napoleoni. My Latin's getting a bit rusty. And then it became Pax Britannica. And now recently, it's also, about 16 years ago, many American neo-imperialist fantasists were starting to talk about Pax Americanum. But Monet, and people who felt like him, certainly wanted to see a new Roman Empire in Europe. Now, if we go back to the start, so this future, centralized, uniform, authoritarian, monolithic. We remember Tolkien. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Yeah, from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. This is what we were heading into. This is what the peoples of Europe were heading into. And I sincerely hope that this year, 100 years on from that very remarkable year of 1917, but let's hope this year, 100 years on, will be remarkable in a more positive way than 1917 was. But I hope that this year we'll see that the Dutch and the French, and who knows, maybe even the Germans, will actually say no to this future. But here's where I have a problem, you see, because in the Brexit referendum last year, I felt that in a certain sense I wasn't represented, that my point of view wasn't represented. I was against the EU. I knew that that whole system was a lie, that the British people had been fed a lie for, well, since we joined, basically, and even before that, by Macmillan and others. That when we were told that this was simply an economic arrangement to make us rich, we'd get wealthy and prosperous with this was never the case. This was always about using economics to create a United States, to create a unitary nation-state called Europe. That was always the goal. The Americans knew that, the British elite knew that, probably our media knew that, and they never told the people in 70 years. One of the most appalling lies. And it only really started to come into the consciousness, I would say, of many people in this country well, really when people started getting online and finding things out for themselves. Yeah? It was only about 10 years ago, maybe, when the mainstream media just began to talk about what might have been behind the scenes. I remember in the year 2000, for example, the Daily Telegraph did a story on how the CIA had funded Jean Monnet's Action Committee for the United States of Europe and other such organisations which were trying to foster this whole project. This was American money going to that, millions, in the 50s. That was reported in 2000 by the Daily Telegraph on the basis of declassified documents. Yeah? But we never heard anything about that in 1975. But if this is the wrong future, then I have to say, and I felt last year, that this future is also not the future for us. Simply to go back to 1939, back to and the important word there is underlined, unitary nation-state, is also not the future. And that's what I'm basically going to be talking about. Many people who supported Remain did so because they swallowed this other lie, or this other con trick, if you will, that the European Union was created to make peace among the countries of Europe. Now, I don't deny that there were some idealists amongst the pro-Europeans back then who might have had that idea. But they were not the people who actually forced the project through. They were not the people who had the oomph and the connections and the money to actually push the project through. Those people were the Americans, who were in an almighty position in the 40s and early 50s. If the Americans had not wanted it to happen, it would not have happened. But the cover story is given out to appeal particularly to idealistic people on the left wing of politics, shall we say, of brotherhood and peace and love and all wonderful things. And that this was why the European Union was created. Because of the terrible situation in World War II and the desire never to repeat that again. No. It was created so that the United States could be the dominant power in the 20th and 21st centuries and on into the future. And for that, a system, a state, under American control was absolutely necessary. Many of you, I'm sure, will have heard of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the American National Security Advisor under Carter. And he's still a very influential geopolitician, advising Obama, for example. And he was, of course, close to David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger. I just would like to read you a couple of passages very short from this book. This is an absolutely must read if we want to read about what the elite, the global elite, see the future. If you haven't read this already, it really is worth getting hold of and reading for yourself. It was written in 1997. And he says here on page 59, he's talking about, the chapter is called The Democratic Bridgehead. First of all, Europe is America's essential geopolitical bridgehead on the Eurasian continent. Eurasian continent. America's geostrategic stake in Europe is enormous. Unlike America's links with Japan, the Atlantic Alliance entrenches American political influence and military power directly on the Eurasian mainland. At this stage of American-European relations, with the allied European nations still highly dependent on US security protection, any expansion in the scope of Europe becomes automatically an expansion in the scope of direct US influence as well. Conversely, without close transatlantic ties, America's primacy in Eurasia promptly fades away. You got that? So if Europe expands, American influence also expands into Eurasia. The further east that Europe goes, the further east that America's power is projected. Conversely, without close transatlantic ties, America's primacy in Eurasia promptly fades away. US control over the Atlantic Ocean and the ability to project influence and power deeper into Eurasia would be severely circumscribed. And then on page 71, he says, the central issue for, this chapter is called America's Central Objective. The central issue for America is how to construct a Europe that is based on the Franco-German connection, a Europe that is viable, that remains linked to the United States, and that widens the scope of the cooperative democratic international system on which the effective exercise of American global primacy so much depends. Hence, it's not a matter of making a choice between France and Germany. Without either France or Germany, there will be no Europe. Meaning no EU, no United States of Europe. And the last one, he says here, hence America's central geostrategic goal in Europe can be summed up quite simply. It is to consolidate through a more genuine transatlantic partnership the US bridgehead on the Eurasian continent, so that an enlarging Europe can become a more viable springboard for projecting into Eurasia the international democratic and cooperative order. Now you can be sure that, of course, Vladimir Putin and his people are very familiar with Brzezinski's thoughts and have studied this book. And that's quite obvious when you read some of the Russian, or you follow some of the Russian media like Sputnik or RT, or you listen to people like Alexander Dugin and other Russian geopolitical commentators. They know what the Americans have in mind. The question is, what do we think of that as British people? Because now you see we're in this strange situation that we're going to leave the European Union which is part and parcel of this which I've just read out, and which was created to facilitate what I've just read out. It was created to facilitate American imperial power, because the American elite saw themselves as taking over from the British elite after World War I. After 1917, remember in 1917, that was when it was bye-bye British Empire, basically, and America came in and took our place. We were already bankrupt, we were already totally dependent on them to fight the war. So America comes into the war in 1917, in April. Russia goes out of the war after the Bolshevik Revolution in November. Trotsky came from New York, courtesy of MI6, quite right. A very enthusiastic naval officer arrested him when he arrived in Halifax from New York on his way to Russia, and then the telegram came from London saying, you ought to let this guy go. So the British allowed Trotsky on his way to Russia. And remember, Lenin was the ideas guy. He was the theorist. He stayed back in Moscow or Petersburg and did this sort of the big picture story. It was Trotsky who was the guy who actually organized victory for the Bolsheviks, the victory of the Reds over the Whites. The Germans allowed Lenin to go through in 1917 from Switzerland, through Germany to Scandinavia and Russia, for a tactical purpose, because they hoped that that would bring about an end to the fighting on the Eastern Front, because the Bolsheviks had said that they would stop fighting. So for the Germans, that was just a tactical maneuver. For the British, I would argue there was something much more to it. That the British actually wanted Bolshevism to be planted, socialism, extreme socialism, to be planted in Russia. That would take me too far afield to go into all of that. Yeah. So this attempt, this project, if you will, this imperial project, which has been going on in America until, and this is the big question, of course, isn't it? Until the victory of Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump simply going to continue it in another way? Or does he truly have the best interests of the American people at heart, the ordinary American people, billionaire though he is? Does he truly have their interests at heart? Is he truly going to stop America intervening here, there and everywhere in the world? Is he going to withdraw the 700 plus American military bases that they have got all around the world in order to save America some money? We've just heard in the last few days he's about to boost up the American military by some enormous sum. What it is, anybody can remember the sum?
60 trillion.
Hmm? Yeah, it's tens of billions, isn't it?
60 billion.
Right. And, okay, one of the reasons for that is he says, well, American military equipment is getting old. So, okay, you can sort of understand that. But the question is, how far is he going with this? When he says America first, does he mean simply putting America is so sick that we have to put all our attention on healing America? So America first in that sense, you see? Or does he mean America first in the sense that we're going to carry on ruling the global roost as we have done for the last 100 years, since World War I? This is the question. And then for us Brits, the question is, are we going to play our usual little fig leaf role in helping him? Because, sorry folks, this really is a vanity issue for Britain. We have to ask ourselves, how much longer do we want to go on being the American fig leaf? Because that's what we have been. Yeah, that was the significance of what happened in 2013 when the British Parliament said no to bombing in Syria. Yeah. They basically said, well, no, we're not going to be the fig leaf on this occasion. Because Obama wanted to be able to say yet again, well, it's not just us. The Brits are going in as well. But this is the question for each one of us as British citizens who are responsible for the future direction of this country. And we exercise that responsibility with the Brexit referendum last year. We exercised that responsibility. But we remain responsible for, first of all, ensuring that that Brexit vote becomes a reality. But then after that, what? And this is where I have, for example, a problem with Nigel Farage. And let me say, first of all, I have a lot of respect for Nigel Farage in that you cannot take away from this man that if you go back to the early 90s, yeah, when everybody was laughing at him and nobody thought he had a dog's chance of actually getting this country out of the European Union. But he kept at it and he kept at it and he kept at it. He did not give up. And in the end, he forced Cameron's hand, and Cameron felt obliged to provide the referendum, have a referendum, yeah? Because of the UKIP threat on the right. So that was real political will. on Nigel Farage's part, and I certainly wouldn't be anyone to take that away from him. And in that sense, one has to be grateful to him. But that doesn't mean to say that the guy is therefore right in everything he says, at least not as far as I'm concerned. Because when I now look at what he's saying in America, when I now look at when he says, for example, as he said at CPAC the other night, the American Conservative Union gathering where Trump also spoke, American political activists, conservative political activists. Farage gave another one of his bravura performances, and it was interesting that fairly close, you can see it on YouTube, fairly close to the beginning, he said that what we want to be able to do is to reach out to our true friends in the world, our true friends who speak English, who have the common law, and who stand by us in times of crisis. And what is he talking about? Obviously, the Falklands, without which we could not have won without American satellite intelligence and other such forms of cooperation. He's talking obviously about World Wars I and II. But that begs the whole question, what were World Wars I and II? How did the Americans get involved? What was the role of the British Secret Service in getting them involved? And so on and so forth. And above all, what were the roles of the elites of these two countries, who already 100 years ago, just like today, saw themselves essentially as the same elite, almost joined at the hip. This London-New York axis, this East Coast establishment of the United States. They see themselves as the same. They're the same kind of people, you see. So that was there already 100 years ago. So when Farage says, these are the people, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, America, Britain, the so-called, you heard of the Five Eyes? The Five Eyes? These are the 5 English-speaking countries who share military intelligence with each other and have done since World War II, and with nobody else. Not anybody else in NATO. Only the English-speaking countries. So what does that mean? Today, as you know, in warfare, it's impossible to conduct military policy without intelligence, without satellites, without cyber and everything else. Yeah? Impossible. If you're a modern state. So this means that in effect, de facto, these 5 countries are already one country, do you see? In military terms. People say, but we didn't go into Vietnam. We didn't do what the Americans said. No, the Australians did. And the Queen is the head of state of Australia. So a representative of the British Commonwealth was there. Subjects of the Queen were fighting in Vietnam. We tend to forget that. We just think, oh, independent country. But hang on a second, every combat that we've been involved in, the Aussies have been involved in too, more or less. Why is that? Because of the contacts between the elite members. 100 years ago it would have been Freemasons. Today maybe it doesn't need to be Freemasons, but it's members in all of these infinite, almost infinite number of think tanks that exist today, which maintain the connections between the elites of the Anglo-Saxon countries on a day-to-day basis. These groups are legion. Constantly meeting, constantly discussing, producing papers, exchanging views, so on and so forth. Keeping the whole thing, the show on the road, running together. So the question for us then is, do we, Britain, still want to be part of that? And the solution, as far as I'm concerned, which I'll get to at the latter part of the talk, is a threefold picture of Europe. So the twofold picture is basically the us and them. Our country versus the other countries, or the Anglo-Saxon countries versus the non-Anglo-Saxon countries. It's this binary dualist picture which we've been working with for 200 years, at least. So I want to talk about later on the threefold picture. But it's all about 2 and 3, you see. And this is where we get into quite an interesting area. The whole question of dualism and threeness, or triadism, if you will, call it what you like, threefoldness. Yeah? These 2 movies, worth watching. Don't know if you've seen them. Well, the one on the right is in German, unfortunately, and I don't think there's a subtitle, but it's just interesting that there have been movies, you see, called 23, the number 23. So that one on the right is a German one, and this one on the left, the number 23, starring the American comic, what's his name, Carey, isn't it? Jim Carrey. Interesting film. But it points to the mystery surrounding this number, 23. And if you go online, you'll find all kinds of people trying to understand, well, what is this number 23? What is the mystery of the number 23? Well, I've been thinking about this for about nearly 30 years. And what I've sort of come to is that really the essence of this mystery has to do with an essential human mystery in our time, which will go on for quite some time yet, but which is particularly connected with the English-speaking people because of the role of the English-speaking people in the modern world. And that has to do with this relationship between dualism or triadism. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, do you understand yourself, each one of you individually, how do you understand yourself as a human being? Do you understand yourself as a being of body and soul? Or do you understand yourself as a being of body and soul and spirit? Right, the third element. Okay? That's the point. Body and soul, we're kind of used to that. You hear it in advertising, don't you? Magazines and the like, yeah? Body and soul, body and soul. But animals have body. Animals have feelings. Animals have an inner life too. Yeah? Animals can suffer pain. So animals, in a certain sense, you can say, have a body and a soul. Soul, I'm using soul here in the sense of an inner life of feeling. Yeah? But is there something beyond that? Is there a spirit which each individual person has? That's really the key here. Yeah? Because if you have an individual spirit, then you have an individual chance to find your own solution to things without depending on authority figures, whether they are religious or political or whatever they are. But those religious and political authority figures, for example, today in Korea, North Korea, previously in Soviet Union, will tell us, no, you have no right to make your individual decisions over your life. We are the shepherds, you are the sheep, and we will take care of you in the flock. Is it this old, ancient, paternalistic way of thinking? And that's why this mystery of 23 is very interesting. I'm sure some of you know the things, interesting things like, have a look at number 23 in Shakespeare.
David Beckham's shirt.
David Beckham's shirt, absolutely. Yeah. You see, this is the problem. Once you start looking, then you say it's everywhere. But then, of course, the cynic will come and say, oh, yeah, but that's the same for everything. If you look for the number 17, you'll find it everywhere. Well, I'm sorry, I've looked. I've done that. I've been down that road. It doesn't work.
I've kept telling people, yeah, that it's actually the 23rd Psalm.
Well, thank you. I was coming to that.
Jim Carrey, he knows about the Illuminati people.
Yeah, exactly.
He's tried to actually out them.
Yeah.
So for him to appear in this movie that you're talking about, he knows what the 23rd Psalm actually means.
Yes, quite. Thank you. Yeah, the 23rd Psalm. Thank you for that. Because the 23rd Psalm points us right back to the reign of King James I, who commissioned the King James Bible, in which the modern text that we know of the 23rd Psalm now is, the psalm that everybody loves. It's supposed to be the most loved psalm in all the English-speaking countries, yeah, the 23rd Psalm. Interesting really to look at that and see what it's about. But anyway, it happens to be the 23rd Psalm. And that was King James I, and he just happens to be the 23rd king after the Norman conquest. And then, of course, he was the patron of William Shakespeare, who just happened to be born on, and just happened to die on, well, we know that he definitely died on the 23rd. To be honest, we're not exactly sure if he was born on the 23rd of April as well, but that's the normal, it's usually said, isn't it? Shakespeare born and died on the 23rd. And I'll just give you one last example from Shakespeare. Very mysterious. Hamlet. You remember the famous graveyard scene? Act 5, scene 1. Act 5, 2, 3, 5. Act 5, scene 1. And there he is with his friend Horatio, and they're looking at this grave. And there's a grave digger in the yard, he's shoveling away, you know, and then they find this dead bones down there. And then the next moment, you know, a skull comes up. It's the famous skull scene. And Hamlet's looking at the skull. Yeah? He's looking at this skull. And he says to the grave digger, whose skull is this? Do you remember? Anybody know? Yorick, that's right. Yorick. It was the skull of Yorick. And Yorick was the comedian, the king's fool at the king's court, yeah? And Hamlet goes, oh, I used to know him. I used to be on his shoulders when I was a boy. And he goes into this memory of Yorick, you know. And then the grave digger says, oh, blah, blah, blah. I can't remember the whole speech, but he says, oh, this skull had lain in the earth for 23 years. What? 23 years, 23 years. Act 5. Yeah? What's that? What's Shakespeare pointing to? This guy is our leading philosopher, Shakespeare. He's not just a poet and a dramatist. We English, we don't like abstract poetry. We like philosophy. We like philosophy which is embedded within human reality. That's why Shakespeare was so loved. Anyway, I'm just pointing out, this is number 23. This is what it's all about. We're going to have to make a decision in this country, and as modern human beings, whether we want to be this way up, or whether you're going to stand me on my head, with my legs in the air, and the 5-pointed star becomes the other way, and you know what that means. Yeah? Are you going to become an animal, head down, legs up? Or are you going to be a human being, as a human being should be, with the 5-pointed star? This is the decision we have to called upon to make. 3 over 2. Or as Winston Churchill said, 2 over 3. And sometimes you see Winston Churchill doing that as well. Yeah?
I think there's a new modern art in London where they buried statues of men head first.
They buried statues of men head first at a new modern art installation in London, right?
Near Hyde Park corner, Sam Williams is on YouTube.
Yeah, are we surprised in the modern world? Unfortunately not. Yeah. But this is the decision, essentially, which we're going to have to make. Okay, this is The Guardian, 1st of July 2014. The UK's nuclear deterrent is entirely dependent on the US. Quote, if the United States were to withdraw their cooperation completely, the UK nuclear capability would probably have a life expectancy measured in months rather than years. Not only are Britain's Trident missiles in a common pool shared with the US and maintained in Kingsbay, Georgia, its nuclear warheads are designed and maintained in the atomic weapons establishment of Aldermaston with the help of US know-how, as recently declassified documents on the UK-US Mutual Defence Agreement confirmed. The report noted that, quote, the UK is dependent on the United States for many component parts of the guidance and re-entry vehicle and for the Trident ballistic missile system itself. Nigel Farage. Today is our Independence Day. Folks, we are not independent. We've taken a first great step towards regaining our independence by saying no to the false dawn, if you will, or the false project that was the European Union. But we are not independent of the United States. We are not in control of our military, because our military would not significantly be able to operate without American help. So, in defence, which is one of the key functions of any state, of any government, to look after and protect the country, in this area we are not independent. we're content to rely on the United States. And we individually, as British citizens, have to make a decision about that, because we know what Trident replacement is going to cost. If you include the running costs going forward to 2060, then we're talking a figure getting up to 100 billion on top of the capital costs. Yeah? Now we have to ask ourselves, what could we do with that? What could we do with £100 billion instead of spending it on another generation of four missiles for 4 nuclear missiles, four submarines?
It might not even be real, 100 billion.
Sorry?
100 billion might not even be real, it could be false.
It could be.
It could be fantasy.
It could be, but it's going to be a lot of money, isn't it? The question is, what kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to continue being the world's policeman? Do we want to continue being Robin to America's Batman? Yeah? Do we want to continue being this fig leaf? Because if we do, then that means we are going to be involved in more of America's conflicts, and we're going to be spending more money on America's wars. And there are people in our elite, and I'm sure you know who they are. They're often on the media. There are people in our elite who want that very much to go on. The question is, do we want it to go on? Does Nigel Farage want it to go on? Well, I don't know. It's beginning to look to me as if maybe he does. There's a list there of all of the American bases in Britain. I won't read them all out, but you'll notice they're all prefaced with RAF. So anybody who doesn't know that place would drive past these bases and say, oh, RAF base. Well, of course it isn't. It's an American base. They're still here after 70 years, folks. This has never happened since William III arrived at the end of the 17th century, when he invaded. The last invasion of England was William III, came over from Holland, 1688. And he brought a whole bunch of, quite a large army actually, with him, and they stayed for about 15 months or something. That was the last occupation, so to speak, of Britain by a foreign army. Well, the Americans are still here. Do we want them still here? This is a question. America, Guardian, 24th June 2016. The US is moving forward with consolidating transatlantic intelligence analysis operations within a planned joint intelligence analysis complex at RAF Crowden, north of Oxford, a priority for the US military's European Command, EUCOM, based in Stuttgart, which is the US's anchor in NATO. You see how important that is? So without RAF Crichton, American military operations in the whole of NATO are going to be severely compromised. Remember what Brzezinski wrote, the bridgehead necessary to project power. Is this what we want to be? That's just more detail of that. On the economic front, well, we saw in 2008 what happens to our economy and also to the economies of Europe when America catches a cold. We are not independent of the American economy. Wall Street and New York are very much in connection with each other. Our investments in America, we have more invested in America than anywhere else. There's always been big trade, certainly, going both ways between the two countries, but particularly big investments, because the middle and upper classes who could afford to invest abroad in this country made sure, from the 19th century onwards, that they were investing in the hugely expanding American railroads, for example. So this was the situation 100 years ago. You see Uncle Sam on the right and Russia on the left, and John Bull is underneath. This is 1901. And John Bull's looking up and he says, as Russia and America is to straddle the world, John Bull says, oh, I used to do that stint myself once. Yeah? So again, you've got these two, you see, these two superpowers, East and West. And where are we in this? Are we interested in being in a middle position, independent, or are we wanting to go on one side? Because if we go on one side, sure as eggs is eggs, eventually it's going to come to some kind of conflict. If not with Russia, then with China. This is a favourite picture of mine. 1789 map of Europe, and it kind of shows you the threefold nature of Western Europe, Central Europe, and Eastern Europe. And you can all see that without me saying anything, right? In Western Europe, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, we see compact, highly disciplined societies, well, relatively, of course, yeah? Disciplined societies governed from a strong centre. Quite effective government. Compact, tight. And then in the East, we see these enormous, expansive regimes, states, great empires, loosely, hard to govern. Russia, Poland, Austro-Hungary, Turkey, Turkish Empire. Amorphous, loose. And then in the middle, we have Germany, Italy, this kind of mercurial mixture, patchwork quilt of states in the middle. That's the key. That the middle has to be mobile. Yeah? We can do this with our own hands. I'm going to put the mic down here and shout. If that's okay, because it's hard to do it otherwise. Would you mind? So we can do it like we can demonstrate this with our own hands. You can do this, and you can do this as a polarity. Yeah? The Chinese, when they bow, they bring these together traditionally and bow. You can see that in old Chinese movies. They bring the contracted together with the expansive and bow in the center, upright, to pay respect to the other. Yeah? But the point is that when we're like this, or when we're like this, we cannot do all the amazing things which we can do with our hands, because we're fixed in either this pole or this pole. And this is the situation, that we've been fixed. Think of our legal system, our adversarial legal system. Think of our political system, our adversarial political system. Think of our economic political system, capitalist, socialist. We've had all kinds of binaries in our national life for 200 years at least. And they've become like axioms, like mathematical axioms, as if we just accept them as fundamentals. Yeah? But we don't have to. Now we're in a situation where, in the 21st century, where we can really start to think in different ways and not assume that any of the things we've taken for granted have to go on. This country, as you know, has a very long history, and it contains all of these, even before Shakespeare's time, all of these peoples who came here, and after Shakespeare's time, other peoples have come here. But at the bottom left, you see there a Roman road. And it's this picture of the Romans and their empire which they created, which has had such an impact on our ruling class and the American elite as well. And this is another reason why I had a problem in Brexit, because it pained me that both sides, Brexiteers and the Remainers, both kept on saying, we've got to stay in Europe, we've got to get out of Europe. Europe, Europe, Europe. And I'm saying, no, no. It's the EU we've got to get out of. We can't get out of Europe because we're in Europe. I know that those 22 miles are important. I know that those 22 miles, what is it, 23? But even if it's 22, that means the 23rd mile is crucial, right? Because with the 23rd mile, you arrive either in England or you arrive in France. Anyway, the point is that how can I put it? There was no... We can't be out of Europe, geologically, geographically, culturally, historically. You see all this. There is so much in our culture which is part of Europe, which is European. We are not actually part of East Asia. We are not part of Africa. We're not part of South America. This is our neck of the woods, Europe. Whether you like it or not, is a fact. And there are so many things which we have given the continent and which the continent has given to us. But unfortunately, too many people in the Brexit debate seem to think that before Henry VIII we didn't have a history. You know, Henry VIII, Protestant Reformation, and then that's it. From then on, it's them over there and it's us over here. There's the binary again. This is what we need to get past. So it's a question of this famous statement by Orwell, those who control the past control the future, those who control the present control the past. The people who produce the history documentaries, the historians who appear in those documentaries, where did they go to university, who are they connected with, these historians, who selects these historians to give the message to the history teachers at school, to give to the kids, and so on. Yeah? The controllers of the past, who interpret the past. One of those, of course, was Churchill. Yeah? When he wrote the history of the Second World War, well, I'm going to tell how it was. So he gives us his picture of it.
No Holocaust.
Exactly.
No Holocaust.
Not mentioned. Not mentioned in Churchill's history of the Second World War. Auschwitz isn't even mentioned. Interesting. But anyway, there are many other things about the picture of the Second World War that Churchill gives us. Here's a Swiss cartoon which is critical of the role of propaganda in the First World War. Do you see a kind of demonic figure up there? He's maybe you can't see that clearly at the back, but he's typing on a typewriter, and the typewriter keys are human beings. And the consequence of what he's doing comes down into the trenches of the First World War. Yeah? And of course now we're all talking about fake news and post-truth, and which is all a load of rubbish to basically confuse us and to distract us away from what Clinton was getting up to and what the Obama administration were getting up to. So all of that kerfuffle about fake news appeared, as I'm sure you noticed, last summer when Hillary's questions were starting to really probing questions were starting to be asked about not only Hillary Clinton's money because of WikiLeaks, but also the whole Podesta, Pizzagate, all of that, pedophilia and so on. And then all of a sudden, fake news began to become this great big issue. But propaganda, yeah, and the Russians, of course, the way the Russians were. Now, I just want to make one last brief little excursion back into history before I come to this threefold thing. Just to really make it clear to you that we, the British people, really have to understand what it is that our elite, the picture that our elite have, which is not only a banking question, I want to emphasise, yeah? It's not only banking. I'm talking now here about people who go back before central banking, before there were any central banks. The Cecil family, the Marquesses of Salisbury, they were the Secretary of State, so foreign, sort of Chancellor and Foreign Secretary together, you might say, under King James I. There he is on the left, James I. And top there we have William Cecil, Elizabeth I, and James I, Secretary of State, and his son, Robert Cecil. And under James, you see two kings there. There's William III, who came from Holland, and George I, who came from Germany. Remember, we have had no English king in this country since 1066. We've been an occupied country since 1066. All of our kings have been foreigners, and only one of our queens has been English. Yeah? Interesting. We sort of forget that, we just assume. But the question, we assume that their interests are the same. But what were the real interests of the Normans? This very small group of Norman ruling class who came and settled on this country, and then did their great accounting with Domesday Book. That unique event. And then what did they do? They conquered the rest, or tried to conquer the rest of the British Isles. And when they couldn't get Scotland, then they turned to conquer France. And then they failed with Joan of Arc. And then, having failed with Joan of Arc, after a little while they had a breathing space, and then they went out over the rest of the world. Anyway, there's James I, and it was his reign, James I, that we had our first North American colony in 1607, Jamestown. And those two Cecils were they were the people who put James in power. The Cecils it was who actually arranged, because you all know that Elizabeth had no children, right? So they brought James from Scotland. They arranged that, the Cecils. They were the ones who made sure, by making peace with Spain, that we put colonies in North America in 1607. The Cecils gave us the breathing space, gave Britain, I should say, the breathing space, peace with Spain, that allowed us to put colonies in North America. I'm just trying to give you a picture of the importance of these people. There are some families which are extremely important in both positive and negative, and often negative way, in the history of a country. So then you see the Cecils, their successors in the late 19th, early 20th century. Marquis of Salisbury, top right there, with a big beard. And then his nephew on the right, Arthur Balfour. Most people today don't know anything about Arthur Balfour. I mean, he was only Prime Minister for 3 years. But they were a very important 3 years. Because in those 3 years, we completely began to reverse our foreign policy, which had lasted for 100 years, which was anti-French and anti-Russian, and pro-German and pro-Austrian, and we changed it 180 degrees and became pro-French and pro-Russian and anti-German and anti-Austro-Hungarian. And hey presto, 3 years later, the treaty with Russia was done, Anglo-Russian Entente, and then 7 years later we had the First World War. Well, that diplomatic revolution began under the reign of Arthur Balfour, who also, by the way, started the process which led to the founding of MI5 and MI6.
And Zionist linked as well? No, actually not. The Cecils not so much Zionist linked. Yeah? That's another strand, that's another stream. These people are, you could say, their real concern was their own family's control. And they came from a very particular religious stream as well, which is called Anglo-Catholic or High Church. So the sort of the highest element of the Church of England, you could say. By high, I mean most traditional. Yeah? So Balfour, a very important guy. These were amateur scientists. Balfour gave lectures on atomic physics, on electricity, on the nature of thought. Imagine David Cameron doing that. His uncle up there was an amateur scientist. These were interesting people, but their geopolitical vision was huge. Underneath them is the son, Robert Cecil, of Marquis of Salisbury. He's not quite so important, but he was very much involved in the founding of the United Nations. Robert Cecil. But Balfour, well, before I just say one thing about him, complete the picture, at the bottom is the modern Marquis of Salisbury, the 7th Marquis of Salisbury. He married the niece of the guy who founded the SAS. Sterling. Yeah. Hannah Sterling, he married. And This family, from the time of Elizabeth and James, have always been involved, you see, with British Secret Service. It was in the reign of James that the first Cecil up there, he starts the British Secret Service together with another one of his key agents, Francis Walsingham. So this family have always been connected with the civil service, but particularly at these two important times in our national history. At the beginning of the British Empire, that's the top guys at the top, and when the British Empire was beginning to come to an end. That's the nephew and the uncle. And the nephew and the uncle just handed over from each other. In fact, there were so many Cecils in the government at that time, the media used to call it Hotel Cecil, British government. So the uncle on the right gave over to the nephew on the left. Now, this is from the Independent on 1998. It says, 21st November, the Conservative century opened in 1900 with a Lord Salisbury in 10 Downing Street running the nation's affairs, blithely disregarding the creeping modernism of new liberalism and revelling in the House of Lords' preeminence over the British body politic. The century ends with his great-great-grandson, Lord Cranborne, that's him at the bottom, it's his honorific name, revelling in the House of Lords' ability to define New Labour's wishes over proportional representation for the European parliamentary elections and championing a continuing role for great families in British politics. The last great Tory aristo, Robert Cranborne, comes from a family which, more than any other, has dominated British politics this century. Non-cum in either sense of that word, Cranborne is heir to a political tradition unparalleled in this and perhaps any other country this century. Have you heard of this guy? Did the media talk about him much? No. But when you start digging, you find out that he was right there in Afghanistan in the 1970s. He was right there organising for the Mujahideen to receive American and British military aid to fight against the Soviets. Yeah? This is a guy who supported strongly Ian Smith in Rhodesia. These are deep, deep conservative forces within our country, deeply hierarchical, deeply aristocratic, who regard the rest of us basically as peasants.
More or less.
I just wanted to finish the picture. A couple of things from Arthur Balfour to connect to today and this decision which we as a people have to make with regard to America. In 1907, Balfour, he's out of office now, he met the American ambassador in The Hague at a disarmament conference. The American ambassador was the ambassador in Rome, a guy called Henry White. And Balfour was a bit of a sort of a somewhat, habitually, he was rather lazy, one of these lackadaisical aristocrat, yes, old chap sort of thing, you know. And he was famous for lounging on the benches of the House of Commons. Anyway, so you can imagine him saying this. I won't try and put on the voices, but you can imagine him, he says to the American ambassador, this is from a book called The 30 Years of American Diplomacy by Alan Nevins, published 1930. And Balfour says to the American ambassador, he says, "We're probably fools not to find a reason for declaring war on Germany before she builds too many ships and takes away our trade." 1907, 7 years before the First World War. And the American is horrified. The American says, "You are a very high-minded man in private life. How can you possibly contemplate anything so politically immoral as provoking a war against a harmless nation which has as good a right to a navy as you have? If you wish to compete with German trade, work harder." Balfour: "Oh, but this would mean lowering our standard of living. Perhaps it would be simpler for us to have a war." White, again, totally shocked: "I am shocked that you of all men should enunciate such principles." Balfour: "Is it a question of right and wrong? Maybe it's just a question of keeping our supremacy." Yeah? It's this kind of attitude, you see.
We were talking about that 30 years before.
Indeed. And then, I'm going to skip this bit. And then Balfour again, in 1909, he writes a letter to President Roosevelt, who's now out of office, Theodore Roosevelt, very pro-British. And Balfour says to Roosevelt, he advocates an Anglo-Saxon confederation to dominate the world. Britain and America together. Because Balfour knows, you see, that Britain's getting weaker. And that in the 20th century, Britain's not going to be able to hack it by itself, British Empire. But because of common law and the common values and these elitist values which both the Brits and the American elite share, well, perhaps we can do this job together. And if we can do that, we can create a sort of pax romanum and keep the peace around the world. So he says to Roosevelt, in a loose federation between us, neither will sacrifice its own individuality. There will simply be imposed on English, American, Canadian, South African and Australian national sentiment a common Anglo-Saxon patriotism. 5 eyes. If they unite against the rest of the world, they will be beyond attack. Such a federation will be a sea empire with no land borders to defend. It would possess the thinly populated areas and all the seas. The Federal Council would only deal with the question of preference and defence. Preference means trade and tariffs. No permanent government would be required. Such a confederation would be practically as unassailable and would dominate the world. It would practically dictate peace by sea to the rest of the world, and the balance of power would be permanently upset. So centuries of Anglo-American dominion would stretch out into the future. Now folks, the question is, each one of you, how do you feel about that? Is this what you want yourself for Britain as voters? Maybe you do, but this is the question we have to ask. So things like this started appearing in the First World War. Posters like this, often paid for by the likes of J.P. Morgan, who had already given us 500 million in 1915.
Loaned.
Sorry?
Loaned.
Loaned. Yeah, right, yes, quite. Loaned. But in a sense, I'm not sure if we've even paid that off yet. Second World War, they were boasting recently that they paid off the Second World War debt. The First World War debt, they wrote it off, basically, in the 30s. Final thing from Balfour. At the elite meeting of the Pilgrim Society, which is one of the original groups where the British and American elite always get together for their shindigs, they have these great banquets. This is after America has entered the war, so Balfour, of course, is very happy. 1917, he says, "We both spring from the same root. Are we not bound together forever? Will not our descendants, when they come to look back on this unique episode in the history of the world, say that among the incalculable circumstances which it produced, the most beneficent and the most permanent is perhaps that we are brought together and united for one common purpose, in one common understanding, the two great branches of the English-speaking race. This is a theme which absorbs my thoughts day and night. It is a theme which moves me more, I think, than anything connected with public affairs in all my long experience." So you see, he's actually saying the best thing about the First World War is that it brought us together and made us one united power which can dominate the world into the future. And the guy who he was particularly connected with in Britain in this whole process is this man here, William Hines Page. Now, I'd like to read some things to you from him, but I'm not going to because it would take too long. But I would recommend, if you can, get hold of the memoirs of William Hines Page, the American ambassador during the First World War. Played a huge role in bringing America into the war on Britain's side. He was I'll just tell you a couple of things about Page, rather than quote you what he himself said. But what's so fascinating about what he said, you see, is that at the beginning of the war, he's kind of polite about the British, a bit patronising to us, but sort of polite, and saying that, well, if we play our cards right, and if we're polite to the Brits, then they will give us their navy, and we can use their navy to do what we want with. But as the war goes on, and the balance really shifts between Britain and America, he starts, his real agenda, so to speak, comes out. And it's all there in his diaries. And the contempt towards Britain is quite amazing. You know, these British are so childish, they're just such medievalists. And we will, after the war, you know, we'll basically be able to get them to do what we want. Or we shall take over. And He was a member of the southern United States, the southern aristocracy, from the most Anglo-Saxon place, North Carolina. He was a friend of Woodrow Wilson. He was a publisher. He worked with the General Education Board, a hugely influential institution founded by John D. Rockefeller. And he was one of the nominees for Woodrow Wilson's presidential bid in 1912, which led to the founding of the Federal Reserve. And he was rewarded with the ambassadorship. He was very close to Colonel House, who was Woodrow Wilson's alter ego, a little bit like Steve Bannon and Donald Trump today, some people say. Yeah? The deep thinker, so to speak, behind Woodrow Wilson. He was an obsessive Anglophile, to begin with. And then after the war, his contribution was regarded as so great by our elite that this is what they put in Westminster Abbey, no less. Yeah? That's the Church of the Royal Family. They put this, to the glory of God, in memory of Walter Hines Page, Ambassador of the United States in the Court of St. James, the friend of Britain in her sorest need, and all the members of the British elite were there. Top guys from government and the aristocrats, of course, including Balfour. Now, his son went on to become vice president and director of the giant AT&T company, and his grandson, Walter Hines Page II, was president and chairman of Morgan Guarantee Trust and JP Morgan & Co., as well as being a long-time trustee of the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, which pioneered eugenics and genetics research. So you see that 3 generations, actually, of the Page family played a central role at the summit of Anglo-American establishment. And it's these people who've been planning for 100 years for Britain and America to dominate the world. And in that process, as Brzezinski shows, the United States of Europe was a key element. And Churchill, of course, Anglo-American himself, said in 1947, 14th of May, in London, "We do not pretend that the United Europe provides the final and complete solution to all the problems of international relationships. The creation of an authoritative, all-powerful world order is the ultimate aim towards which we must strive. Unless some effective world supergovernment can be set up and brought quickly into action, the prospects for peace and human progress are dark and doubtful. But let there be no mistake upon the main issue. Without a united Europe, there is no sure prospect of world government. Without a united Europe, there is no sure prospect of world government. It is the urgent and indispensable step towards the realization of that ideal." It was 1947, 3 years before Monet created the European Cold Steel community. Yeah. Churchill was, of course, in the loop, and by this time, the Jewish circles had also got on board, together with these English aristocratic, waspish circles, and they were also financing and looking forward to the United States of Europe. And other people I know, for example, here, Ian Crane has talked about Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi and the Kalergi plan. But Kalergi was somebody else who had both Catholic and Freemasonic connections. And like Monet, had connections with the British and American elite, and was working towards the founding of the United States of Europe. Here he is. And at that speech in Switzerland, which Churchill made about United Europe, the year that was, let's see, now Switzerland was 46, and then London 47, and Hague 48. Those 3 great speeches. Well, Kalergi says, before Churchill's speech in Switzerland, Kalergi and Churchill actually collaborated and cooperated on the speech. And they met there in Switzerland. And Coudenhove-Kalergi himself later said, in 47, "At the heart of Europe we have met in open conspiracy, to use the words of H.G. Wells. The purpose of this conspiracy is to organise immediately across Europe the parliamentary majorities that will be strong and stable enough to impose upon governments the full implementation of our programme, which is the European Union within the framework framework of the UN, which was created by these same people, by the Cecils, by the British elite, going back to the First World War, League of Nations, and so on. Yeah? So, again, we have to decide, are we going to go along with this? Is this what we want, having left the EU? You listen to Nigel Farage and others, you imagine they want us in a certain sense to go back to the Elizabethan time, when there was that very short period of 49 years when Britain had no overseas territories, apart from Ireland, of course, and including around the British Isles. But I mean beyond the British Isles, no overseas territories. Only 49 years. And in that period, which is when Shakespeare lived most of his life, by the way, in that period, that was the time when Britain had, well, we had no overseas colonies at all. Yeah? So that was a period when the Cecils began to emerge and began to lead Britain out of this sort of its isolation, if you will, or its insulation as an island, and go out into the world empire. And that's really the time where this whole process began. Remember, there were no Jews in Britain at that time, in the time of Elizabeth. Jewish people came later. And that's why in conspiracy circles, and people try to look at alternative history, I have to say, as somebody who's been interested in history all my life, that you cannot claim that everything is down to the Jews. It isn't. It's down to people who have desire and vested interest in maintaining spiritual, ultimately it's spiritual, it's mind control over the rest of the population, who see the rest of the population as children and not ready to be advanced yet, not ready to grow up. They see themselves as the grown-ups, and the children must therefore be told what to do. And this is the grand aristocracies of Europe, some of whom still have considerable influence. And I would say the Cecils, by the way, were the people, the latest one, Marquis, 7th Marquis, was the one who enabled the 93 blood aristocrats to remain in the House of Lords. Remember that? It wasn't so long ago, 1999. The Blair government finally tried to get rid of the hereditaries from the House of Lords, right? It was Cecil who led the fight back against that and maintained that, kept the 93 blood-based aristocrats in the House of Lords. He led that campaign. So these are significant people. And with their allies amongst the Zionist lobby, people like Soros and others, they are the ones who see the United States of Europe as absolutely necessary for this American world, Anglo-American, Anglo-Saxon world domination. So,
ask you one question.
Yeah.
Where does the German situation fit into all of this?
Okay, the question here is when or where?
Where does the German?
Where does the German?
All of this, it seems to be excluded from the talk.
Right. Okay. Where does the German situation fit into all this? Well, I'm sure some of you will know that 2 years ago, well, soon 2015, so nearly 2 years ago, a guy called George Friedman gave a lecture to the Chicago Global Council, and he let the cat out of the bag. Has anybody seen this video? It's on YouTube. George Friedman, it's called. And I think the title is something like Divided Europe. But if you look for George Friedman, Friedman, and he runs a strategic forecasting group called Stratfor. Stratfor, Stratfor, very highly connected, geopolitical advice to businessmen and so on. And he said in that meeting, in a question and answer session, interestingly enough, somebody asked him, are ISIS an existential, forgive me, is this familiar to people? Have you heard this? He was asked a question, are ISIS an existential threat to America? And he said, no, they're not. They're a problem, but they're not an existential threat. We have to deal with it. We will. And he could have stopped there, but he didn't. And it's interesting, you see him almost making a momentary decision, shall I go on or shall I not? And he does, he goes on further. And he says, what is the existential threat to the United States? And he says, the primordial, that's his word, the primordial threat to the existence of the United States is the relationship between Germany and Russia. Germany and Russia. And it's our, I can't remember the verbatim, I'm afraid, but he said it's our interest, yeah? It's existential for us to make sure that doesn't happen. So it's absolutely necessary for Germany and Russia not to combine against the United States. What does he mean by that? He explains it a bit later on. And basically what he's meaning is German discipline, German form, German intelligence, German know-how, plus Russian muscle, plus Russian minerals, plus Russian natural resources, and so on and so forth. These two come together, we're finished, we're sunk. This is an existential threat. Well, that's not his idea, do you see? That idea you can find in the British geopolitician Halford Mackinder. Mackinder, M-A-C-K-I-N-D-E-R. Halford Mackinder, who was the father of Anglo-Saxon geopolitics. 1904, he put forward exactly the same idea. The West has to stop Germany and Russia getting together, or it has to stop Russia and China getting together. It has to control Central India and Central Asia, because that is the control of the world. You have that, you have world power, he said. India and Central, the Siberian and Central Asian hinterland of India. Yeah? You have this, you control the world. To get that, you have to have control of Eurasia, what he called the world island. And to have that, you have to have control of Eastern Europe. That's the springboard into Eurasia. And what do we see America doing today?
Ukraine and so on.
Yeah. So, Friedman and Brzezinski quotes Halford Mackinder in his book here, page 38. He quotes him there. These guys know this British history because they're students of British imperialism, do you see? They know how the British strategists thought, and they're thinking the same. It's the same game plan. We British citizens have to decide, are we going to go along with this?
We'll stop here.
Stop.
20-minute break.
Okay, right, good. So we'll stop here then. We'll have a 20-minute break, and then after the break, we'll have a question and answer, and then I'll say something about this threefold solution for the future. Thank you very much. Let's say welcome to everyone. I think safe spaces in our circles is non-VC, isn't it?
They do it in every church.
Okay, yeah, just a little connection back to what I was saying before. 23rd of January 2013, if you remember, David Cameron gave his talk at Bloomberg European headquarters in London, City of London, where he spoke about the beginning of a 2-year process which would lead to referendum. And he said, you know, I'm going to persuade the leaders of Europe to give us a good deal, and if they don't, we'll have the referendum. Remember that? That was 2013, 23rd of January. And then last year, around about Christmas, I think, when they were saying, well, the referendum is going to be in June, it's not going to be later. And I thought to myself, it's going to be the 23rd of June. And hey presto, it turned out to be the 23rd of June, didn't it? The referendum. Interesting. So the process started on the 23rd, and it then sort of finished in a way on the 23rd. And that was the headquarters of Bloomberg in the very centre of the City of London. Interestingly, by the way, if you've been there, Bloomberg European headquarters is located directly over a temple of Mithras, which is one of the oldest, which is one of the oldest Roman archaeological sites. I think it might even be the oldest, but don't quote me. Certainly one of the very oldest archaeological sites in London, in the city there, is a temple of Mithras, which was the religion, particularly of the Roman army, Roman soldiers. Very interesting phenomenon in itself. Bloomberg are today de facto sort of caretakers of that temple there. Right, so here we have the 5. Now you know that the pentagram, 5-pointed star, is all over the place today. In alternative circles, I think there are people who assume that the 5-pointed star is automatically evil. This is not correct as far as I'm concerned. It just depends how it is used, whether you turn it upside down and how you look at the 5-pointed star. The 5-pointed star is very much to do with the life force of a human being. It is just represents how we are made, you could say. But you can ask yourself, why do we not see this 5-pointed star, which we see everywhere today, in the countries, whether they're capitalist or communist, in the flags and so on? Why don't we see that in the Middle Ages? Why don't we see that everywhere in Rome and all these other cultures? You can occasionally see them in ancient Egyptian places, but it's not like it is today. 5-pointed stars become something very, very important today, and the reason for that is because our age, our particular time, since approximately the 15th century, has a certain task, and that task has to do with the understanding of good and evil. And the age before us, the Roman age, the Greek age, within the history and culture of the West at least, the Greco-Roman period, that age had a different task. And that task was the understanding of what is true and what is not true. Particularly in relation to birth and death, the mysteries of birth and death. What is the real, truthful understanding of human birth and human death? That was a question which particularly occupied the, especially the educated classes, it has to be said, in those periods. And if you go back even further into the Egyptian time, before the Greeks and the Romans, and those older cultures, I'm thinking also of the cultures, a culture I happen to know very well myself, because I lived there for 10 years, is Japan. The Eastern Asian cultures. And if you look in those cultures, which, not the Buddhist culture, the pre-Buddhist, Buddhism is quite intellectual in fact, it's a culture that came in the Greco-Roman time, when human beings were learning to think. But before that, human beings had to learn to feel as human beings. And the key characteristic there was, we had to learn to feel what is beauty and what is not beautiful. So morality in that earlier period was rooted not in what is correct and what is not correct, what is true and what is not true. That's what the church was particularly interested in the Middle Ages, for example. But morality in this older time was connected with what is beautiful and what is not beautiful. Yeah? And that's very much the case. You can find very many examples of that, say, in the Japanese language and culture, even today. The idea that what was moral is beautiful, and what is not moral is not beautiful. So we have these 3 words which we're familiar with in the West: beauty, truth, and goodness. Yeah? And you can look, it would take me too far afield to go into this at great length now, but you can look in history at how these three developments of our humanity have gone on from beauty and non-beauty, truth and untruth, and goodness and evil. And our age today is wrestling with the task, if you like, or the challenge of what is good and what is not good, what is evil. Why is it that so many of our young people are walking around with the most horrendous things on their t-shirts? They don't care what little children see these horrendous skeletons and monsters and all the rest of it, and absolutely vile things sometimes you see that people are walking around. Are they not? Yeah? Why is that? Why is it that people today are walking around in that way with these images of hell and death and mayhem and all the rest of it, you know?
Desublimation.
Bloody zombies and, you know, sorry?
Repressive desublimation.
Okay, that's a nice psychological answer, yeah, right, yeah, maybe. But the point is that was not what people in old times would have done, you see, would have wanted to be seen walking around with like that. today human beings want to understand what are these forces of evil which resist our development. Yeah? Because it's in working against these forces, working to these forces, so to speak, that we actually develop our own morality. This is good and evil relationship. And this is the period in which we are today, and it will go on far into the future. But it runs in parallel with another threefoldness. Because if you go back to when I started the talk, you remember, with the wall of the domes, yeah? That was the time when the rulers of many countries, right across Eurasia, many cultures, the ruler was regarded as a demigod. The ruler was almost a spiritual being on earth. Egyptian pharaohs, for example, Japanese, Chinese emperors. They were not almost human, they were regarded as divine or had been planted on earth by the divinities. And there was no independent economic or financial section of society at that time. Everything was coming down from the gods. So you could say the world of the priest, the world of the spirit, was all-powerful in those cultures. There was basically one principle, and everything else, there was no politics in those days. Yeah? Politics, as we understand it, began to appear with the Greeks, who at least had the concept of monarchy and aristocracy and democracy. But if you go back to ancient Japan or China, there was no politics, there was no economy as we understand them today. There was the will of the emperor. And this was then passed down through the priesthood, or whether it be the Mandarin class or whatever. And that went on for a certain period of time. And by the time we get to the Greeks and the Romans, humanity develops in a certain way, and then we begin to see the development of politics. And then we see a second principle emerge, which counters the first one. We see aristocracies emerge, who are usually military in nature. And these military aristocracies have a connection with traders and people of commerce. Not yet finance, but traders and commercial people. Yeah? It's all about you and me, and let's do a deal. Or let's fight. Yeah? I have my interests and you have your interests, so let's fight so that my interests will be superior to yours. Combat, business, line and staff. These military terms, which are so much a part of the business world even today. Military and commerce, these two things, and the aristocracy, they come together in human history. So a twofold principle begins to enter in. And these political people, we start to see the beginning of politics, begin to oppose the religious factions, the priesthood. And that goes on for a long time, right down to the Middle Ages, right down to Luther and the Reformation, the struggle between the popes and the emperors, and so on and so forth. So the political realm was trying to emancipate itself, you could say, from the uniform control by the spiritual realm. But from the 15th century onwards, gradually that political realm emancipated itself. And now we can say, particularly with something like the American Revolution, where you get this strict separation in the American Constitution of the powers. But then a new force begins to enter in from the late Middle Ages. And we start to get the beginning of banking, very proto-beginnings of banking in the Middle Ages. And then gradually, with the Industrial Revolution and so on, we see the economic realm. But to begin with, this economic realm is controlled by the church in the Middle Ages, like through the guilds and so on. You can't shop on this day, you can't sell on that day, you must go to church on Sundays, so on and so forth. The economic realm is not freed, you see. The economic realm is not emancipated. The king controls it. The merchants have to get a charter from the king for their town so they can do business in the way they want to, and so on. So gradually we see this economic realm begin to emancipate itself from the political realm and from the religious realm. So by the time we come into our century, the last 100 years, we see this struggle of the economic realm to emancipate itself from politics. And this is where we still are today in a certain way, right? Because what happened is, and this is a really key thought, I think, I'm just going to talk about another 10 minutes and then we'll go to questions. And then, this is a really key thought, that Our problem in the West, with particularly our Anglo-Saxon model of capitalism, which is destroying the planet, frankly. And it's another question for the future. If we go on with this model of capitalism, then I'm not talking about global warming here. I'm talking about simple pollution. I'm talking about the destruction through the pollution which we're causing, the destruction of species and so on and so forth. Why is this happening? It's happening for a very simple reason. A very simple reason. And that has to do with a certain way of thinking which we have now accepted as natural, but it isn't natural. But it's so deep-rooted that we can't, it's like part of us, we can't get rid of it. We think it's natural and automatic and given, like a mathematical axiom, but it isn't. What is it?
Profit.
It's the profit, as a gentleman. No, it's not. It's more simple than that.
The devil is a liar.
Because profit is already an economic concept. And the problem is, you see, that in our society today, economics has not yet freed itself from a spiritual principle. And what is that spiritual principle? That spiritual principle is freedom. That spiritual principle is the principle that people like Luther said, I want to be free to worship God in my own way by myself, and you shall not tell me how to do that. That's the principle of liberty. And that principle of liberty was first in our European culture, first really voiced really strongly from the spiritual realm. And even before Luther, you had all kinds of heretical sects and groups which opposed the church, also saying the same thing. We want to be free to worship God in our own way, and not as you tell us to. That has to do with this idea that I have a spirit, you see. And I'm not just an animal with a body and a soul. I have a spirit, and through my spirit I find the way to God. Not through the Pope, not through the Bible, not through the church, but I will find it in my way. And those are the heretical sects, and the church destroyed them. Because the church said, no, that's not the way. You're a sheep. You have to do as you're told. So that's where it starts. In the Reformation and these heretical sects in the religious realm. But what then happens is we start to make a problem in our European culture. We apply this principle of liberty and freedom to politics. Now, liberty and freedom is essentially about me and my freedom and what I want to do with my life. And I'm the best person to decide that, of course. But as soon as we come into social life, as soon as we come into life with others in politics, then it's a case of, well, what are your interests? And what are my interests? And we have a situation here together. Can we work this out? So it's mutual, you see. It's not just all about you. It's about I and you, the two of us. Give and take. That's what politics is about. Give and take. Right? Mutuality. So that's a question of equality and inequality. That comes into question. Not freedom, not liberty, but equality. That's the essence of politics, right? The ground essence, so to speak. And that's why politics is nothing to do with the mind, it's not philosophy or anything. Politics is like the House of Commons, sorry to say, in one sense. In other words, it's drama, it's feeling. Politics is feeling, fundamentally. Politics is not philosophy. Yeah? That's what one person can do in his or her own room. But politics has to be social, it has to be involved with this give and take. Okay, so we've got liberty, but in the West we began to apply this religious principle, which is so powerful, we felt, into the realm of politics. And right away we fell into problems. And that led to all kinds of horrors in the religious wars. And then later in the 18th century, people began, like the French revolutionaries, to think of their principles in the revolution like religious dogmas or religion. If you don't believe this, then we shall slaughter you. So what had happened in the Middle Ages in religion was now applied to politics. The communists went on to do the same thing, of course. Yeah? Now the third thing which hadn't yet emerged, and was beginning to emerge, was of course fraternity. The three great sayings of the French Revolution. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. The problem is these have remained abstract in our culture. Because they remained abstract ideas, because they weren't applied to society on the ground, in actual social relations, this is why they remain unfruitful in our culture for the last 200 years. And this is what we've got to do now, if we're going to find a way through our problems. So fraternity, Okay? I'm not talking socialism, I'm not talking communism. Sadly, they were errors of people who were trying in the wrong way to understand what fraternity was. But the point is that just as economics tried to emancipate itself, and hasn't finished yet, from the state, from politics, and from religion, now we see that we have to find a way to create the basis of true economic life, true business life. And what is that? How does that work? Well, it's like this. What happens today is, I have an idea. Capital. Capitalism. What does it mean? Capital. Comes from Latin, caput, which means the head. So I have an idea. Okay? Maybe people need this. I'll make that. Now to make that, I haven't got any money. Where am I get the money from? My brother will lend me the money. Thank you. Oh, you can't lend me the money. I'll go to the bank. So I go to the bank, right? So I get the money to put my idea into practice. Already I've made a problem. I've made a mistake. I haven't asked the community, do you need my idea? Yeah? Is my idea necessary? No, they don't ask that. They just say, I want to do this. Now please try and get a hold of this, yeah? Because it's so basic, but we've not got hold of it over the last 200 years, because it leads directly to overproduction, do you see? I want to produce something for myself, and then my family, and my family will become rich, and their descendants and so on. My family. But does the community need this? Maybe not. So okay, I'll get hold of a PR company, an advertising company, and persuade them that they want us. Well, you know the rest, right? And this is called overproduction. Production of things which actually are not necessary to the community. Things that the community doesn't want, but which the ad industry persuades us that we want. So what that means is, folks, that the economy in our modern capitalist society is governed not by a true principle of economics or business life, but rather by a spiritual religious principle. I'm not running down spiritual religious principles, I'm just describing. The spiritual religious principle is the principle of I. The political principle is the principle of and the economic principle is the principle, obviously, of we. Because, folks, without we, you can't make anything, can you? We're not living in the Middle Ages anymore, where you can make your shoes, but the cobbler can do everything himself, make your shoes, cut them out, sell them, take them to market, blah, blah. We're not living in that world. We're living in a world of division of labour. We're living in a world where any kind of economic work, people work together. Without people working together, they can't do anything. Two Japanese corporations compete like fury against each other, but inside that corporation, they work together as a team. And if they can't do that, that corporation doesn't work. So the essence of business life, of economic production, is to take things from nature, thank you very much, to nature. Respect, is there any? But we take from nature, and together we make things, not for ourselves, but for other fellow human beings. That's how it should be, should it not? In other words, what people need, we make. If they have a need, we make for them. Not, we don't make because I want to make. But that is the basis of our modern economy. Right? So, if we go on like this, we are running an economy on a false principle. China is using the same, essentially the same principle. India is using the same principle. They both have 1.3 billion people. So their economies are gigantic, and the amount of minerals and everything they're using and resources is also colossal. So we can see where we're going with this, yeah? That our European concept, that historical mistake that we made centuries ago, in using a spiritual principle in the economic realm, is wrong. It's the wrong principle, and it leads to immorality in the economic life. So that's why our economic life becomes poisonous and ultimately cancerous, because it just grows and grows and grows. And we can't stop it. Of course not, because we accept the basic root cause which I just described. Yeah? I want to make something. It begins with manufacture. It begins with production. Then you go for the money. But to begin with, it's this thought that you have. I want this. Without asking, is my thought a good thought? Is my thought a necessary thought for the community, for my fellows, for the environment, and so on? So, somebody asked earlier a question about Germany, and 100 years ago, during the First World War, there was an Austrian, his name was Rudolf Steiner, and he came up with a thought. He came up with a thought about how this economy could be made moral. And he wanted, this was the time when Woodrow Wilson was coming to the fore in the United States, and spreading his ideas about League of Nations and all these wonderful things, so-called, actually totally illusory. He didn't understand Europe at all. But anyway, he was putting forward these ideas, and people in Europe thought he was a saviour of sorts. And Steiner's thought was, the Germans and the Austrians have to have some sort of thought. They're not fighting for anything, they're just fighting for survival. This is hopeless. They're not standing for anything, whereas the Americans are now standing for something. It's false, but at least they're standing for it. They're claiming to fight for that. So he's saying, we need something that is true and human, that is based on human reality, that we can put to the world and say, this is what we are standing for. He failed in the end. He tried to communicate this idea to the leaders of Germany and Austria and Hungary. They weren't interested. They were too old-fashioned in their thinking. Yeah? But his thought was basically that we need to have a separation of the three areas of society which are now totally mixed up. Spirituality or religion, the religious life, the spiritual, cultural life, the arts, the scientific research, all this is the cultural life, the life which the individual does, and then the political life and the economic life. And these three are all hopelessly mixed up, he said. Look at how the state controls education, cultural life. Look at how the state controls economics, interferes in the economic realm. But what's the result? So you see, we need to separate these so that they can each run on their own principles, according to their own inner natural laws, if you will. Just as we have our three physiological systems in the body. We have our nerve sense system, which is rooted in the brain. We have our circulatory system, which is rooted in the heart and the lungs. And we have our metabolic system, which is rooted down here. We have these three systems in the body, and these three systems have their proper place. They should not screw each other up. They are interrelated, but they should not be in the wrong place. I mean, I think that's fairly obvious, yeah? So he was saying that we need to have our economy organised, our politics and our spiritual life organised in a similar way. Unfortunately, his idea then was not taken up because people were too hung up on the role of the state. People still wanted the state to run things in those days, and not only communists or fascists, but also Democrats. Here in Britain, for example, the state decided in World War I that it will be time, gentlemen, please, at 10:30. So the state sticks its nose into pubs in order to get the people into the factories to make things for the war effort, right? So you're not free to drink when you want. The state now tells you when you can want. That's an example of state interference. It became exponential in this country since then. You know what happened. So the situation is now where the state tried to run this and that and the other, education, business, industrial policy, hospitals, and we see that politicians and bureaucrats cannot run businesses. We've learned that over the 20th century. But in 1920 they did not know that, you see. That's why they went for communism. That's why so many intellectuals in the West were seduced by communism. Because they thought the state will protect the workers from the horrible capitalists. And the horrible capitalists were operating according to this wrong principle. That's why they're horrible, do you see? Selfish, self-centered, because it's me, and I. The wrong principle. So the workers have to be protected by the state. That was how socialism and Marxism got going in the 19th century. who started saying, if things can be organised according to their right principle, then we can realise, in particular with the economic life, that it shouldn't be that the initiative comes from I, but rather, what does the community need? Let me just finish with this thought. Just imagine now, and we can be free to imagine, yeah? Just imagine if, when somebody has an idea to produce something, whether it's a new line of biscuits, or whether it's a new widget, or a new car, whatever it is, somebody has just an idea, wake up one day with an idea. Well, instead of immediately going to your brother or your sister or the bank for money, and then you build a factory, and then you hire people, and so on and so forth, you have in your area an economic association which consists of representatives of the manufacturing, of the distributive, and of the consumer groups in your area who always meet regularly. Manufacturers, producers, distributors, and consumers are constantly always meeting, not just Chamber of Commerce cartel-like people trying to do deals to benefit producers. No, distributors, producers, consumers. The three groups which are involved in the economic life, right? They have an association in your town. So you go to this association, you say, well, I've got this idea. What do you think about this? I'd like to go ahead with this. And that association has the right, given to them by the government, by law, which the whole society has agreed with, to say to this individual, great idea, we think, please go ahead and manufacture it. Or, no, not a good idea. Doesn't benefit our community. We don't want it here, thank you very much. Sorry, go and think about something else, yeah? However they reply. So, there's an interaction between the producer and the community. And in this way, ethical ideas, ethical motivations can start to come into economic life. So he argued for the creation of associations between manufacturers, distributors, and consumers. And that this would be part of a new economic paradigm which would overcome the falseness of this wrong spiritual, wrong religious principle which has been dominating our economic life for the past 400, 300 years. It would take me too far afield to go much longer. That I think is a really key thought to get over, though. That our economic life is really working according to the wrong principle. It needs to work according to the principle which we haven't learned to apply yet, which is fraternity. And we associate, particularly people on the right, associate fraternity with communism and dictatorship and totalitarianism. No, it's not that. It mustn't be that. But rather, it has to be, how can producers and distributors and consumers continually agree and cooperate together in every part of the country, all the time. And this will produce a totally different nature of economic life. Okay, I'm going to shut up now and go in. We have some questions in the last 15 minutes or so. Is that okay? Yeah?
Just one question.
Okay, there's one question here at the front.
With your
I'll repeat the question so you look back and hear.
With your argument about economics, where does domination, control, greed and corruption come into all of this?
Where does domination, greed and control...
Where does domination, control,
greed and corruption, where do they come into this? They come in that domination, greed and control are all dependent on the thoughts about self and about the world which that person who is trying to exercise domination, greed, control and corruption have. Which is a wrong spiritual...
Well, it's the people at the top, isn't it?
No. It's not the people at the top. The problem is the people at the top themselves, in their own minds, in their own spirits, have their own wrong ideas, you see. If you wish to exploit other workers... How do you change that? Well... How do you change that? Well, for example, that's a very good question. Let's just assume that people begin to say, well, let's try this associative idea that this guy's talking about.
The Steiner is putting an intellectual argument on, and the people who run the show aren't going to change the status quo.
No, no, no. The gentleman's just said the problem here is that Steiner's putting an intellectual argument over, and the people who are at the top are just running the show. This is not an intellectual idea. Steiner's point is that this threefold development is not just an idea, it's actually happening in the course of
It's
history.
been going on for thousands of years.
No, it hasn't. There were not consumers groups thousands of years ago. There were not consumers groups 100 years ago. There was not fair trade 100 years ago. What is fair trade? Fair trade is a moral, ethical beginning, a seed thought and seed behaviour, where people start to think there should be relationship, human relationship between me as consumer and the person who is producing. Do you see? That's a moral intuition. And when people can get intuitions, which is a spiritual deed to have an intuition, right? And if you then transform your life according to your spiritual deeds, you can change the economy. Now if you say, oh, that's going to take ages, well, everything takes ages. Everything's going to start somewhere.
We're slaves now. We were slaves 6,000 years ago.
We were slaves, we might as well kill ourselves, mightn't we? We're slaves now, we're slaves 6,000 years. I don't accept that, I don't know about you. I rather see the child is a slave. The child is what he's told by his parents, and so he should. But the child grows up. Yeah? It's quite obvious. If you really look at the study of history, and I'll say something controversial here, but I recommend you, if you look at the centuries of history, 4th century, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, I'm only talking about Europe now, but I can assure you can apply it to Japan as well. I've done that. If you look at those centuries, and you look at the 14th century, and you look at the 7th century, and you compare them with the child at the age of 7 and the child at the age of 14, and you look at what happened in the 14th century, what kind of things happened, you see development, you see puberty, you see the change of teeth, you see the changes that the individual child goes through, our civilization has gone through. You begin to see that the Renaissance and the Reformation and the things which happened before it, and the Black Death and the chaos and all of that in the Middle Ages, was puberty. It was a puberty experience in European culture. And now we're 21. So it's about time we, took the key of the house and grew up and became independent. Yes, Andy?
I think there's a book called The Rising Kakistocracy or something. It's about all the world will change in one generation, because all the children of the billionaire psychopaths have got this spiritual or this more holistic thought process going in their head. So you've got the goldsmith who wants to save the rainforest. I know it's petty at the minute, but there's baby steps. So just to give Sean a positive message, one generation.
I don't feel like that. I don't actually feel like that.
Okay,
that is,
hang on, I'm coming to it just a minute.
I don't personally feel like that, but that is the situation that has been going on for an awful long time. And the dominant...
That's your PowerPoint.
The gentleman is saying that the situation has been basically so bad for such an awful long time because of all the people in control and so on. But I'm sure if we look, a bit deeper, surely we can also see that people are waking up, that development is taking place.
There's an awful lot happening at the moment.
Yeah, tremendous lot happening. That gentleman had a question. Okay. In the blue.
Well, yeah, we've got system value disorder, haven't we? That's the thing. And there's no link to the planet, is there? There's natural capital banks springing up now, which are giving a value to a tree, aren't they? And it's a nice interface, I think, to that element where you've got to link to the planet. Whatever you do, everything you do has got to be linked to the humans, to the biosphere we live on. And I think that's got to come in. Capitalism doesn't relate to that at all. It's just profit, isn't it, for the shareholders? That's ultimately what capitalism is.
Yeah, okay, but again, remember...
there's no link to the planet, it's profit.
Okay, fine, but if we've got to be careful here, because if you start, we've got to ask ourselves, what is capitalism? Even Marx did not totally damn capitalism. From his sort of evolutionary point of view, he saw that capitalism was a next step, a phase of development, right? So one has to recognise what is capitalism going towards, and not just sort of automatically damn it as something profit. Of course that's true. Of course it's like that, but it's like that, I would say, from what I said before, because of this mistake that was made, you see. Because they were only thinking of the self. To begin with, the lower octave, the lower is the lower ego. I want, the teenager. But the teenager has to rebel. The teenager has to say, I want. Yeah? The teenager can't be controlled by his parents all the time. At first, the teenager has to go, me, self-assertion. That's capitalism. But it's also natural, isn't it? We've all been there. We all went through this. Most of us, unless some of us were, you know, monklets or something. I mean, we all went through that. And then later you go through that, you come to something else. Then hopefully you get to a higher ego stage of how can I put my activities at the service of the community? And then you begin to think in terms of economic life being a life of service and cooperation. And it's those two things, service and cooperation, are the essence of real economic activity. Not socialism and communism, which is simply the state telling people what to do again, isn't it? Yeah, there's a gentleman, yeah, you are the next. Yeah.
As you were saying about how far we have actually got as a human being race, we have only, science fiction wise, you would believe that we've actually entered into a Star Trek realm and going whoosh, yeah? But we've only known outside of the Earth from 1969. Which is only 48 years. We haven't gone nowhere in terms of being out there in space. It's only 48 years since we've been up there.
Allegedly, somebody said over here, how was it that the Egyptians knew about the heliocentric origin of the sun, for example? Yes. Thank you.
You started off with the premise Brexit.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that the essence of what you were talking about, the ego and I, and the cult of the individual and so on and so forth, is real development of humanity. Seems to be, people don't know what I is because this whole Brexit, Trump, lied to, manipulated, voting thinking like, I'm going to vote this. Well, what is I? Because most people, they accept other people's ideas into themselves and think, I'm going to do this, I'm going to vote. But basically, the development of human beings should really be based around an understanding of what I really is, and they're getting rid of all this trash, which is what's happening.
Yeah.
But you've got the regulatory powers bill and all these Snoopers charter and all this. It seems to me that these elite people have realised that they need to create a dictatorship because they're so afraid that they're losing control of everybody's spirit of mind and soul.
Yeah, exactly. Because since the 15th century, in the West, again, I'm just restricting to the West here for the moment, people are waking up, right? And so people are saying to the former shepherds, we don't need your shepherding anymore. But the shepherds, try and look at it from the point of view, and here's a difficult one, okay, as I'll throw this one and become more controversial for those of you who are either materialists or atheists, will think this is controversial. But I happen to be a subscriber to reincarnation, right? Think of these elitists, these shepherds, these would-be shepherds, as people who, in their previous lives, for example, had such thoughts and couldn't relinquish. And so they carry on these ancient ways of thinking into the modern period. Yeah? Who are some of these great financiers? These great, who is Bill Gates? What was he before? This is just something, well, you know, how do you explain these kind of people then? Anyway, I'm just saying that I agree with you, yeah, it does come down very much to, does one have an understanding of oneself? Most of us not even interested enough in our own biography. How many of us can remember what our lives were like when we were 10 years old? Yeah? Are we even interested in ourselves? What if we're not interested in our own biographies? Well, how on earth could we be interested in anything else we might show? Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So where do people go with, sorry,
yeah.
with, you know, with this control happening more and more, what I would say is the only way people can go is to develop themselves and form community, as you were saying.
Yeah, exactly.
A walking away,
yeah.
almost, like the psychopaths, just ignore them.
Yeah, well, I mean, the gentleman, he's gone now, but I mean, who was saying, being a little bit pessimistic, I think, before. Remember, Zbigniew Brzezinski made the point a few years ago, I think it was about 2009, when he was giving a lecture to one of these elite groups, and he was talking about this great political awakening that was going on. Okay, it's messy, it's chaotic, but from his elite point of view, it's a problem. Do you see?
It was in Poland, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a problem. And I think that those of us who are interested in the alternative, we need to be careful that we don't think ourselves into thinking everything is under control. Well, if you think everything's under control, you might as well kill yourself, frankly.
That's not the views of Truthjuice. We don't have to.
No, exactly, Andy. Yeah, well, there's a gentleman in the green who's been trying to ask you a question.
I was trying to get your attention for this guy. He's been trying to get your attention for this guy.
Who is it that we're trying to get the attention to?
He's gone on the toilet.
Think about it.
Terry's ocular vision is only to the 5th seat back, so...
We finished at 11, so we've maybe got 2 questions, yeah?
Yeah, we'll give him
Did you want to...
No, I'm
That's okay, Ian's gone.
Okay,
I've
fine.
gone for a splash and down.
Alright, we've got maybe time for 2 more questions. Yes, sir?
Earlier on you said that the American view was that they need Europe as an outpost. What's your view of Trump and his view rather disparaging of the EU and NATO and all that kind of? Do you think he's kind of going against the trend of previous American policy, or is he continuing it?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? I mean, it's still early days in a way. I'm very hesitant to sort of damn the guy, or I'd like to see how it goes, for a few months at least. But one has to notice a number of things. One has to notice, first of all, clearly this man, like Hillary Clinton, has got very strong connections with Israel, even through his own family. I don't think there's been such a pro-Israeli or pro-Zionist situation as much as this particular administration. That's just one point. And we have to see how that plays out. But I think Trump is, in his instincts, he's a businessman, he's a man of instinct, he's not an intellectual, he's a man of instinct. And his instincts are definitely nationalistic, right? Again, I'm just using that word descriptively. His instincts are nationalistic, so he's personally sceptical of these sort of grand, global type schemes, or the kind of schemes that Wilson had, or some of the ones I mentioned before, sort of creating the new Pax Romana. The question is, as I said, is he going to try to, in some way, nevertheless, continue that, or for the sake of America's glory and grandeur, or is he going to do the right thing, as I would see it, and focus on healing America? Because America is deeply sick. It's got so many problems. It needs to withdraw from the world. It needs to get out of the world's face. And it needs to come home and heal itself. That's what America needs to do. I'm hoping he might at least start that process. He might not finish it, of course, but he might at least start it. And in many respects, he's you can imagine how disgusted the educated East Coast elite are looking at him, But frankly, as far as I'm concerned, compared to George W. Bush, Trump is what? I'm not sure what the word is, but well, he's an amazing person compared to George W. Bush. Yeah. Certainly, he's a narcissist.
He's going to spend so much more on war.
Well, we don't know whether he's going to spend so much more on war, Roy, that the idea that in order to keep peace you have to be strong, that's a very old idea. That goes back centuries.
Yeah. You've got to say them sentences, and just to keep from being took out of the verbal in the meantime. They took Flynn out last week, and Flynn was wanting to pull people out of NATO. So.
Yeah, I mean, that again is a bit worrying. I mean, NATO, this is the real question. Again, we come back to Britain. Do you want to stay in NATO? How do you feel about NATO? How do you feel? What's Corbyn all about? Why are they going for Corbyn? I think for 2 very simple reasons. Because they cannot allow any British opposition leader to be to be anti-nuclear weapons and anti-NATO. The British establishment insists that both sides of the game must be pro-nuclear and must be pro-NATO, because those 2 things are absolutely necessary for the system which I described earlier. That's why they're determined to get rid of Corbyn, irrespective of what Corbyn is like as a leader. But those ideas cannot be allowed, from their perspective, from the elite perspective, cannot be allowed to gain purchase within the British political debate. Otherwise the British people might start saying, oh no, why do we need to be in NATO? NATO should have been wound down when the Warsaw Pact was wound down. Yeah? Are you prepared individually to genocide the population of Russia? You yourself? Theresa May has already said she would.
4 minutes.
What?
She said within 4 minutes you press the button.
Within 4 minutes you press the button, yeah? That's the point. If the Russians were to attack, I mean, complete absurdity as far as I'm concerned, but if they were to attack, then would you be prepared? I mean, you'd be dead already. Britain would be wiped out. But just as a matter of Old Testament revenge, would you be prepared to press the button and kill all the population of Russia? Well, I'm sorry, but I wouldn't. But that's just me. You know, I mean, you're talking genocide, in other words. Are you prepared to genocide a whole nation? A nation is something that goes on into the future. Yeah? The nation can change.
That was what the film Crimson Tide actually had brought up into their subconscious.
Right.
Both sides knows it. The information I've got here.
Okay.
And I've given it to the Labour Party and told them to put it on Putin's desk, put it on whoever's desk needs to go on. Told people in the streets to go and look it up on YouTube, anti-war, but nobody, and the person who is going to press that button, they don't themselves, within their heart, actually want it to work. So the will is never there, because it's not God's will. It is not God's will, so the numbers and everything that they put in will not work. That's why the missile went berserk the other day and went back to where it was made.
We've just got
got
time for one from the nationalist.
One more question from Ken.
Nationalist.
Ken.
If people were interested in finding out about Rudolf Steiner's ideas with this threefold social order, is there a reference that you could give?
Well, there are two things I could recommend. There's this book here called Functional Threefoldness in the Human Organism and Human Society, which basically looks at the relationship of threefoldness within the human physiology, right? The point being that we need a social structure, an economy, a politics, a cultural realm, which is not founded like Marxism on intellect. And it's also not founded like social Darwinism on animals. Dog eat dog. Big fish eat little fish. That's our economic system, basically. It's copying the animal world. And that's because the materialism became so dense, so intense in the 19th century, that the ideas of materialistic science were just carried over into the political and social realm.
Cut it open.
Yeah? So